Hello BookTube. I'm doing something a bit different today because I'm going to be doing a book review of the new Troy Bramston book, Gough Whitlam, The Vista of the New. Now this is a new biography of our 21st Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam. He was Prime Minister from 1972 to his very controversial dismissal in 1975. And I was very excited for this because I've talked about Troy on the channel before. He's done some great Prime Minister biographies. He's done a great book on Paul Keating. His book on Robert Menzies is amazing, as well as his book on Bob Hawke. And now this isn't the first time Troy has talked about Mr. Whitlam, because I'll put it up here. Troy's written a lot about Whitlam, particularly on his dismissal and his party's dismissal. We have, for example, he's done this with Paul Kelly, who's a journalist, the dismissal in the Queen's name and the truth of the Palace Letters too, which we'll get to that later in the review, what the Palace Letters are. But so this isn't Troy's first rodeo with Whitlam. And what I was really looking forward to in this book was Troy's great ability to really blow the dust off these prime ministers and really give them a new light as a human, because I feel like a lot of prime minister biographies really don't tend to focus on that personal aspect. And so I was really excited to see Troy work his magic on Whitlam, because Whitlam is such an interesting figure. Will always be relevant and genuinely made a lot of changes, legislation changes and introductions to a lot of things that are still in effect today. And he's just a very interesting figure, like Medibank. We need that. And so I was very excited to see Troy do a big biography of Gough Whitlam. And the more Prime Minister biographies we get, I'm very excited for, because it's always nice to have a new one. And I'm very much hoping one day we'll get a massive, book on Billy Hughes, 2-volume or whatever, just a brick of Billy Hughes, because he deserves it. But I'm just manifesting that out. But anyway, let's get started with the review. Now, what I really liked, this is pretty much very much a life to death biography, cradle to grave. And I love that literally you don't even get Gough Whitlam into the election as prime minister all the way until 300 pages in of this 600-page book, because the first half is literally talking about his childhood and his education and his entry into the Labour Party. And it's just so incredibly interesting. And I love that Troy was able to include a lot of Gough's passions growing up, like his interest in the ancient poets, Roman poets, sorry. And it was like a nice callback to what he done with Robert Menzies, because Troy included a lot of poetry from Robert Menzies in his biography, which is really nice, because it, kind of takes away the loominess of some of these figures, because it really makes them human. And so the first 300 pages is Gough Whitlam growing up, and his and it's interesting because during the time he was entering politics, he was because he was Labour, and he was pretty much had to sit as the opposition for a long time, because he was in a 20-ish year period of the Liberals being the governing party. And so he had time to really work on his policies and just really shape himself as a politician. And it's interesting to see people like Bill Hayden and Bob Carr and Andrew Peacock in this time period, just to see how they intertwined with Whitlam's story. And I just found that really interesting too as a side bit. And we get to see that. And by the time we get to Whitlam's election time to be prime minister, it's such a fun read. I was on the edge of my seat. I know it's a bit nerdy, but it was just such a fun read. It is so approachable in a way that a lot of them aren't. Like, I think of Graham Freidenberg's biography of Whitlam, and I found that a bit more dense. Again, that was written at the time in the 70s, but this just completely blows the dust off of Whitlam's rise, and it's just an incredible read. Once we get to his prime ministership, we Troy really hammers how much Whitlam was able to do in 3 very short years. In terms of his traveling to other countries, he was the first prime minister to travel to China. He'd done a lot of policy legislation, which was incredible. And it's interesting to see Gough's. Oh my god, I'm getting this wrong, but the way other people thought of Gough Whitlam, such as President Richard Nixon, which was really interesting because of the Vietnam War that was going on, and Gough really opposed the Vietnam War and was extremely critical of Nixon in that time period, as well as he got along better with Gerald Ford. But yeah, I found it really interesting to see what Nixon thought of Whitlam in the same way of what Margaret Thatcher thought of Bob Hawke in Troy's other biography. So that was really nice. I liked that Troy included Gough's morning routine as daily routine as PM. I thought that was very lovely as well. And also, I found it really interesting, Bob Hawke's relationship to Gough Whitlam, because I never really thought of them as being, Bob really critiques a lot of Whitlam's decisions, especially about cutting 25% on tariffs across the board to ease pressures of a supply shortage that was going on. And this was Gough Whitlam made this decision without without talking to businesses or unions or the tariff boards at the time. As Whitlam said, this would encourage local Australian businesses, and this came to really bite him in the butt because the Liberal Party took advantage of this, and we'll get to that later. And so it's interesting how that was very much implied early on in Gough Whitlam's early Prime Minister chapters, and just to see it unfold, as Whitlam really did have a very chaotic party. He wasn't the best politician. He was very much more of an ideas man, you get the sense of, rather than an actual, politician. And it's interesting to see, even back then, he pointed out Paul Keating for being, a future great. And I found that really interesting, how, compared to Hawke, Gough didn't think as strongly, or at least at the time, as much as he did of Keating, which I thought was a bit interesting. And I thought the Prime Minister chapters were really nice. I don't think Troy skipped over anything. They were really accessible, and it was just very interesting. And we don't even get to the dismissal until the 500-page mark. The most interesting, or at least the most popular thing that people know about Whitlam, with his dismissal by Kerr. And I was really interested to see how Troy pulled this off, because this could have easily overshadowed the entire book, literally. And it's literally a couple of chapters. It's very interesting because this biography is published years after the Palace Letters were released back in 2020, and that is Sir John Kerr, the Governor General. He I think there's a lot of personal stuff we don't know that happened between Kerr and Whitlam. We know bits of it, but I'm not going to spoil it because of the book. And Kerr decides to pretty much just sack Gough Whitlam and the entire party. And it's controversial, and I don't want to go too much into it because it is in the book, and you know it, it's there, but it's done so well here. I actually think this is my favorite part of the book, in terms of it's the best written account of a dismissal I've honestly read, and I've read a lot, to be honest. I find it's refreshing with the notes of the Palace Letters that Troy has included, so it has more context, and also the sheer amount of people he researched into who knew Gough at the time and who were involved was just incredibly interesting. And for me, it was a real relief because it did not overshadow the book at all. It was such a really great breakdown of it. And also, I really loved the ending in terms of the last half of the book, which is very much talking about, Whitlam after his dismissal, and, him kind of going off and failing to win the 1978 vote against oh my god, I can't remember, Malcolm Fraser, and I found that interesting as well, especially Bill Hayden and what was going on there. I found that really interesting, and Troy done a great job with that. And just the Whitlam's legacy years, I thought was really interesting. Him as a teacher at a certain point, the books he wrote at that time, and just him really settling into like an elder statesperson of Australian politics, even if he very much did have a rocky legacy at certain points. But I feel like that's kind of smoothed out now that we have a lot more context, because it's come out in the last like 5 years, because everyone involved is pretty much dead. I know it's it's true, but and so I feel like that was a really lovely chapter as well. And the way Troy's able to interweave Whitlam's political life and his personal life, especially with his wife, and also what other Labour Prime Ministers thought of Whitlam. And it's just an incredible read. If you're interested in a Gough Whitlam biography, I would honestly say pick this one as a place to start. Like, you can move on to Whitlam's own book, which I have back behind me, The Truth of the Matter, which is about his account of his dismissal. And obviously I've got Sir John Kerr's The Truth of the Matter, which is his version and account of dismissal. I'm not going to talk about it much because it's all in here. And it's just a very refreshing biography, because Gough Whitlam really deserves it. And I feel like Troy done a really, really great job. And it was just a really nice read. And yeah, so that is just a quick review of this new Gough Whitlam biography. Again, it's refreshing because it's the first, like, there's only been this biography and Jenny Hocking's biography in literally the last 20 years. And I know it's been like covered a lot because there are a lot of books written about Whitlam, but I feel like it's just refreshing because of all the context we have now, just morphed into one biography. And it's just such a nice read and not a challenge at all. And yeah, it may be challenging if you don't know much about, if you're like international, you don't know much about Australian politics, but you'll recognize some of the names if you're Australian and whatever. But yeah, that was just my quick review of Troy Bramston's new Gough Whitlam biography. Again, it's very great timing because on November the 11th is the day Gough Whitlam was dismissed, and he made a famous speech on Old Parliament outside, and it's so iconic. And yeah, so if you're feeling a way to reflect on that time period, this is the perfect book for that time. And yeah, let me know if you're going to give this book a try. It's a very lovely read. And yeah, thank you so much for watching BookTube, and I will see you next time.